Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here, that we've made it to the other side of 12/12. So how is everyone doing? Welcome to the Catalyst Weekly Astrology Report. Normally we do this on Friday, but you can't control everything or very little, in fact, about what happens outside of you. And sometimes you just have to be flexible. So how is everyone doing? It's Monday morning. So what I think we're going to do here today is we're going to do a little bit of retrospective. I feel like it's very important to still go over the astrology of the weekend with the first quarter square of the sun and moon, Venus conjunct Pluto, the sun was square to Neptune. There is a lot happening even up until today. Mars is in Sag, Mercury moves into Capricorn. There's just so much happening and shifting, and this past couple of days was just packed in with so much reorientation and shifting around and incredibly challenging situations that we should really talk about it. So normally what I would be doing, especially if this is your first time here, normally what we would do is on Friday go over the weekend astrology in a general way, and then I go through the astrology per sign and give you the option of finding your particular sign and just tuning into that particular reading. So what I am actually going to do today, which may be what I do in the future just in general, we'll see, is this is going to be a little bit shorter maybe today in terms of just the astrology of the weekend and then the general themes leading up to. We have a Gemini full moon, a huge full moon. Oh my gosh. The sun will have just passed the galactic center, will still be pretty much in conjunction with the galactic center at this full moon. There's going to be a big release. There's going to be a big release in terms of the information we have been holding within us, what we know, what we think we know, our ability to adapt and communicate and basically just interface with the direct environment in front of us, right? To really see what in our immediate environment and not only see, but have reflected back to us and to feel into our own emotional landscape what is holding us back and what needs to be released in order to release us moving forward. So I feel like this is a really big closing point in some ways with the nodal axis of the moon being in Gemini and Sagittarius. This is kind of a closing out point with this full moon. This is going to be on the 18th, and right after that on the 21st is when the sun moves into Capricorn, and we have the solstice, right? So winter solstice for the northern hemisphere. We have the summer solstice for the southern hemisphere. So once we reach this solstice point, we're going to find, in fact, on one half of the planet will be the darkest in terms of the amount of light that is available to us. And then on the other side of the world, on the southern hemisphere, they will be having the opposite experience, right? They're going to be at their summer solstice. Either way, we're finding a peak moment of dark and light in which we start to shift gears. So there's a lot of shifting gears that's about to happen, and everything that happened, I would say, up from Friday on to even today throughout the week is going to be a big part of our own personal reorientation in order to, know where we really stand when we come into the solstice point. So how is everyone doing? I'm going to share a little bit about my own personal experience. I think we're so ready for this full moon too. I can't, don't let 2021 especially, right? Because we are leading up to the end of the calendar year of 2021. So don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out type of thing. I am definitely ready. And I think, Emily, you're totally on point there. I think we're all ready for this. So I'm curious to see how people are doing, how the weekend was going for you. I have a feeling that maybe it was pretty intense for people because I'm not seeing too much activity on the stream first thing Monday morning, which is not surprising to me. So Friday, I had a small emergency that turned out to be, thankfully, everything was fine, but just my spouse having some really intense symptoms that really freaked him out, and he had to leave work, and I went and picked him up from urgent care, and of course they had nothing to say about what was really happening, because we all know that it is beyond the realm of allopathic medicine to really be able to identify and diagnose energetic changes at this point. Someday that may be the case, but not right now. And Saturday, I was rendered completely inert, right? I couldn't function at all. I was in such an overwhelming amount of physical pain that I couldn't even bring myself to open my eyes. I guess you could call it a migraine, but it wasn't really a migraine. So it was very, very intense, and I was, crippled in a lot of ways. And I finally had to break down and take medication, which is something I hardly ever do. It's out of desperation and out of sheer, desperation, and just, it was unbearable to me at that point. And so it was really the next best thing when all of my other, my tools in my toolbox were just not doing it. And I think that was a very important moment. So I'm curious to see how people experience the weekend, either in physical nature or and I bet you has a lot to, of course it does, has a lot to do with things and where they're situated in your own chart, and what was going on, I think will have a big impact on that particular aspect of your life. But it was a really important moment to stimulate some things, to bring some things to the surface, and to clear a lot of garbage away. And bring awareness to certain aspects that maybe we, some little things, not little things, but just maybe one more real push to be like, this is where you need to work. And not so much that I think that what we experienced was necessarily an upgrade. It felt way more like an invasion. Saturday morning was hard to get out of bed. Yeah, dude, I woke up on Saturday with a headache, and it just got worse and worse and worse, to the point where I was like sobbing. I was in so much pain that I was actually crying because it hurt so much. And we all have the things that we are dealing with right now, either physical issues, emotional issues, our mental health, right? Spiritual challenges. They're all here. And so they got placed right in front of us. But I do feel like as well that it wasn't necessarily, and I've talked about this, right? Emily and I talked about this actually over the weekend too, that it felt like she coined it really perfectly, actually. So I have to credit her with this particular phrasing, because it was just like, yeah, I mean, it felt like an invasion, an enemy invasion. So there's so many things that happened between Friday and now in terms of, what's out in the realm of experience here, out in the external world. I mean, the storms in the United States, right? The tornadoes that happened, that was a big deal. That was on the day that Venus was in a conjunction with Pluto. We're going to talk about that conjunction and really unpack that, because it's really easy to kind of, and not to say that it doesn't have to do with like reestablishing relationships or anything like that, because Venus does have a lot to do with relationships, but she is really much more our connection to the physical world and the world of value and harmonization and desire, and the object of our desire, and worth and self-worth. And she does rule Taurus, which does rule the objective world, which we could identify as our own bodies, for instance, and also value and worth and comfortability. And so having Venus and Pluto meet each other, and then to have people whose very livelihood, their very safety, their very objective reality completely destroyed. Okay, so we're going to unpack this a little bit more in terms of those kinds of themes, because I think it's really important. Now, again, it has a lot to do with where you're finding these major transits in your chart that are going to have an impact on your own life. But we can also see so many things coming out of the woodwork to be expressed, or certainly they can't be turned away from. And there's a lot of damage control in general, I think, with Venus in a conjunction with Pluto. A lot, because there's no, Venus is the great attractor. And she ain't got nothing on Pluto, who is the final word on pulling us towards our destiny and our transformational potential, right? Through the inevitable cycle of life and death and rebirth, right? In our physical nature, this is built into the program. And there is an acceptance of this in order to transform at a soul level. And in evolutionary astrology, this is where you find your soul's default setting for transformation is where you have natal Pluto. So very transformative energy coming right into our everyday, palpable awareness, our sensitivity to the world around us and how that makes us feel, really just brought to our awareness and to the surface. The moon in a conjunction with Neptune, squaring the sun right before the sun then squares Neptune directly. We're going to talk about that. And so many things that I really wanted to talk about and unpack for this weekend that just, was not going to happen. So these retrospectives, I think, are really important in terms, just like studying our own history. When we study the astrology in a retrospective way, we can start to put pieces together that we may not have seen if we are forecasting necessarily. So I think it's an important thing to be doing. And then what do we have here? What else is going? Like I said, Mars has entered Sagittarius. Mercury has entered Capricorn, right? This is the area that Venus and Pluto had been in a conjunction. So in some ways, even though that really palpable, very powerful, raw connection, and it's the first of 3 conjunctions, right? Venus is going to station retrograde and come back to meet Pluto, and then come back to meet Pluto again later in in early 2022. So, like in February, right? Late February is when that'll happen. And so this is just the first of 3 of these meetings. And the first one I think was very devastating. And so we're going to have Mercury now in the same basic area much earlier in Capricorn that's now going to start putting our mind and our mental facilities and our intellectualization towards these concepts of Capricorn, of what it means to contribute to something and what that actually unfolds as, and being able to conceptualize it mentally rather than strictly just feel it. And remember, Mercury, or Hermes, is such an important, potent character, but in mythological context was the only one really able to go into the realm of Hades or the underworld and come back out. And so there's something very important about Mercury now really starting to address these issues, where in its detriment in Sagittarius this whole time, it's just been very focused on the big picture, which is not a great, it's not a powerful place for Mercury. Capricorn, it could go either way, right? I mean, at least there's some momentum behind Capricorn because it's a cardinal energy, but at the same time, it can get very dense and very serious with Mercury and Capricorn. But to be perfectly honest, maybe that's a little bit of what we need now, is to get our minds kind of really focused and taking this seriously, as opposed to really just getting swirled around in the hot air of the big picture. And I think that this is a really important moment, especially now Mars is moved into Sagittarius today, same day. So all of this Sagittarian energy, where the Sun and Mercury has been, is we got this really strong initiative now to act on the meaning, right? The meaning and the social value and the collective paradigm that we've been really thinking about and finding our voice through. Now it's time to act on it. So it really depends on so much of how we've interfaced with this Sagittarian energy. And once we get to this full moon and the Sun is in conjunction with the galactic center and then passes it, we're going to have an idea of what has enduring value, socially, collectively, even spiritually, and what needs to be released in terms of our own knowing and our own conceptualization. It's going to be a really, really, it's going to be very eye-opening, I think. And even for those of us who probably have some, generalized idea of what this may entail, I still think that all of us are going to see something that really has been holding us back, a debt in terms of our awareness and our consciousness, and the way that we conceive of reality really needs to be let go of and released. So Barb says, a lot of meditation and sleep. On Sunday, I felt like my energy was consolidating and high heart opening, some in meditation, some kind of initiation. Something happened for sure. Again, I still feel like there was an invasion, and part of that is the moon in Pisces meeting Neptune. We've talked about this. I mean, it really leaves us open to influence, and influence in a way that is, we don't even know if it's ours or somebody else's. So again, the invasion part could have very well been in relation to this. And I do feel like that's the case. Better to feel it rather than internalizing it, though. I feel more empathy for normies. Oh my gosh, yeah. Because they're really going to get it the hardest, I think. Obviously, we know that. I mean, but anybody that also, too, is operating under this idea that they have it all figured out is also in a position. They're not any different from the people who we identify as the normies that don't think about or conceptualize things in the same way in terms of their spiritual journey. I feel like it's going to be a very similar experience of just like, whoa, I didn't even realize this was all holding back this whole time. And yeah, better to feel it than internalize it. Yeah, it was impossible not to do those things, to be honest. I mean, you reach a point where you have to surrender to the situation because all you can do is be in the midst of it. And for me, it was in my body, which is a very second house thing. And that's where Neptune is for me right now, is in my second house. And the moon moving through Aries, I'll tell you what, I'm ready. I'm ready for it to leave Aries. Every single time the moon comes into Aries, it's like inflammation makes its way into my body so strongly that it's like this. But this was really, really strong. The strongest that it's been in a really, really long time. So I just want to validate people's experiences over the weekend, because it was a big jumping off point, but there was also a lot of energy being expended to mitigate this somehow or to block something. So, the field, the electromagnetic field is absolutely weakening. And I'm going to post a bunch of videos and such that I watched over the weekend that I thought were really valuable to these conversations. And so suspicious observers, and how, just really being very stark and very real about how quickly the field is deteriorating, and how much that is not being talked about anywhere else, and how that electromagnetic field is what has been protecting us and keeping us within, but also protecting us from what's without. And the weaker that gets, the more susceptible that we are. And the more important it is that we are tapping into the Earth's grid and creating our own enhanced field around ourselves as she is preparing for her own magnetic flip, which is part of the way, I think, is going to be part of the way to really release us from this larger false grid that is being overlaid and has for a while, right? You just flip the positive and negative charge, and it completely disrupts the field. And unfortunately, there is a real strong physical backlash to that we have the potential to really be prepared for. And we've had a long time to get ourselves energetically and spiritually prepared for what that means. And I can't sit here and tell you I know exactly what that entails, but I have a pretty good idea. So let's see, I was dealing before that with a playback of earlier self-esteem issues, couldn't tell if it was them or me, so maybe it did feel like an invasion. Yeah, and I think that those things fed off of each other, right? I don't think that they were mutually exclusive. I just, one of the things that, again, Emily and I talked about, and I've talked about with other people too, in just personal conversation is, you can start to feel when you start in tune with your own energetic signature and what it feels like when you interact with other things energetically. You start to feel the difference between, oh, that was an upgrade, or oh, that was a download, or oh, that was an astral invasion. And this and my experience, leading up to this point was a lot of information being presented to me in the astral or energetically or intuitively that this, in fact, there would be an invasion. There would be Agent Smiths working overtime because they knew how important this moment was. This was a tipping point. And so, I have some ideas. I'm not going to share them on YouTube necessarily about what I think the storms, and a lot of people got sick over the weekend, like intense feelings in their bodies or having anxiety or anything like that. And I do feel like that, the growing pains of of the ascension process or awakening are certainly in and of themselves valuable, but it does also feel like that there was a very intentional pursuit or an intentional movement towards blocking something or invading, right? And again, Moon in Pisces conjunct Neptune when the sun is at a square with it, and then the sun squares Neptune directly. And we've talked about that square. I've talked about it endlessly because it was a big part of the eclipse readings, is these Sagittarian squares to Neptune and Pisces, that for all of the ways that we are trying to act in accordance of the meaning of where we are going, it's no match for Neptune and Pisces just dissolving even meaning away. And so boundaries as well are dissolved. So I think it did feel like an invasion. I felt invaded. I also feel like that, that it's giving us a heads up to the almost like a finale point or a climax point with this full moon in Gemini that's coming right before the solstice. So we're going to go over the astrology, like I said, from the weekend and look at the major themes for the week. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start recording separate videos per sign. So each sign, because I'll be on here for hours if I try to do it now. And so I just want to focus on the general themes now, and then I'm going to, throughout the day, I'm going to be recording small videos for each sign for the week leading up to the full moon, and get a lot more specific with each sign and what it means as well. So if with all that being said, let's get right into it. And I am not firing on all cylinders today, my friends, that is for sure. I mean, I'm still kind of cloudy. It's kind of foggy in my head right now. And, and that's part of when you take certain medications, to deal with your symptoms or inflammation. And the cannabis use was spiked considerably over the weekend. And as much as I'm an advocate for it for healing purposes, and even for its psychoactive properties and how absolutely incredible it is in terms of the journey, in terms of your raising consciousness, there's a pretty distinct fogginess that goes along with the channel, at least for me, when I start using a lot more. And so there's a give and take there. And I think that habitual use really will shut down your ability to access very clear insight and overuse, right? It's not meant to be used habitually. It's meant to be used as a medicine. And medicine can be spiritual too. And I can definitely tell the difference. So I'll do my best. And I think once I get into just channeling the astrology in general, it'll be a lot easier. But I'm just being real with you, as per my namesake. So, all right, let's get into the astrology. So, and we're going to start looking at this. Whoops. And it's, we still have till I'm firm on the fact that late January into February, it's going to be rough until then, right? This is probably the weirdest. It's even weirder than last year. At least last year, we still had all of this like hope for the election results around this time. And now it's like, with Neptune direct in Pisces, as we've talked about many times, and of course with the moon meeting it at the same time that it was in a square to the sun. I mean, the defeatism and a passive acceptance and just kind of falling into escapism is very, very high. And it's very easy to get discouraged. And also, this is exactly, the invasion too is to just destroy your resolve so much that you just kind of give in. And that's a real strong potential with the square from the sun to Neptune in general, right? Is that it's very easy to just engage with whatever fantasy escapism is out there, just to convince yourself that it's okay. And I think that is going to, it is what it is, right? Everybody's on their own journey right now, but I think personally, these squares to Neptune are some of the most challenging astrological aspects, even more so than Venus conjunct Pluto. I mean, yes, it's really powerful, and in some instances was absolutely destructive. But at the same time, it really brought to right on our doorstep what it is that is being essentially dismantled and destroyed for us to access the underlying energy that is pervasive in all of life and how it functions. And so that also is coming with the veil slipping, right? And when we say the veil is slipping, I would say that you can literally think of it as the electromagnetic field is weakening. And the more weak it gets, the more we actually see, right? The more we actually feel. We're not protected either way by the field of the planet. We have to step in and be part of that now. And that's what we're here to do. That's one of our jobs right now. And I think some people are getting it more than others because of the fact that we're still kind of, picking up the slack energetically for a lot of people. Not as much anymore, but that the weekend made it pretty clear to me that there is still a lot of that happening. So, all right, guys, let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to look at is this first quarter square that happened on Friday night that I really wanted to. Man, there are a ton of bots in this chat. Are you guys noticing it? I guess that's a good sign that I'm getting so much more of these, whatever these are, whoever's in this chat that is giving these .tech things. I have no idea what it is, but they clearly are little bots watching what's happening here. So here we go. This is our first quarter square, right? And so remember, our lunar cycle that we are currently in started with a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse in Sagittarius, where the path of totality was over Antarctica and had a lot to do with the immersion from underneath of the karma from a previous cycle, right? This is something that is going to unravel over the next 6 months, as we talked about with all of the eclipse energy. But this lunar cycle is still part of a smaller, more condensed lunar cycle. And the full moon in Gemini is going to be a big part of at least giving us awareness where we can start in terms of that longer cycle making itself known over time. This full moon in Gemini is going to be a really large showing, a very bright reflection of like, oh, okay, these are the things that have endured, and we can find our voice through the things that have a beautiful necessity, I guess you could say. It's like it's like a covered bridge that's been there for, like a straight century or more that people still use because the structural integrity of it is still so sound. And then with the moon, though, in our own feelings, right? And what we feel about what we know and the variability of our own emotional landscape, we're going to finally see what has been holding us back. It's kind of like bankruptcy, right? It's set up to relieve unbearable pressure. Man, that phrase, unbearable pressure, that's what it felt like in my head. Unbearable pressure. It was like my entire spine was on fire, and in the top two vertebrae that, connect to your skull, it was like a hot set of clamps that was just like squeezing it. It was, talk about unbearable pressure. But it's going to come through in terms of our expression, our communication, our thoughts, our ideas, and the way that we conceive of the reality around us is going to, what unbearable pressure have we been squashed under that needs to be released in order for us to start a new cycle. That's going to be a big part of this full moon. Anyway, so here we are starting with this first quarter square, right? Crisis in action. It's that first crisis and that first squaring off between how we feel and how we express ourselves after the new moon. So this was on Friday night. As you can see, it was right before the moon met Neptune as well. And there's a certain level of expectation that comes along with, and foresight that comes along with Sagittarius. Again, because when you see the big picture, then you see the whole picture too. And you can, kind of, you can, well, not kind of, you can see the big picture. And so you can see what's coming and use what's around you in order to take care of your future, right? And so sometimes in this situation, you may find that you have to kind of give up your relaxation or your quiet or your anything that is, you might have to overcome some obstacles now in order to make sure that it's not worse later, right? So this is where the sun is, and I do feel like that this could literally have been referencing, prepping, right? Prepping, use our natural resources appropriately, right? Be able to think ahead and see the big picture, which I think many of us are doing, and the amount of bigness, right? How wide this perspective goes is very different for people, but we can overcome obstacles and capitalize on every eventuality in this position. And the negative side of it is that we completely lack perspective. So when this was in a square to the moon that then met the Neptune in Pisces in that moment, I mean, this is a real trust in what's happening with the moon and Neptune in Pisces, right? A full surrender to the collective unconscious, to the cycle that will inevitably end and then begin, because that is, in fact, the Pisces changeover into Aries. The idea that the table is already set. Right now, on the one hand, we are finding ourselves and our sustainment and our expression through an action of sorts, because that is Sagittarius. This is very passive, especially the moon in a water sign in Pisces with Neptune, like total disillusion, right? Totally dissolving into the experience and just being part of it and not trying to direct it, not trying to act on it, not doing anything, but just being in it. And I think this is where the invasion really found its was through this. And it's not that we don't learn things from this situation. That's, I think, important to consider. It may have felt like an invasion. It may have been It may have been in some ways, but that doesn't mean that that situation can't be utilized for growth and learning. And especially with that square, right? Because again, crisis in action, what are we going to do? Well, one side of us, the side that's expressing ourselves, is like, hey, what are we going to do? Well, we better plan for the future here. We better act on the big picture that we see here of what is coming. And the moon and meeting Neptune especially had us especially in the dream state. I mean, I think Friday night's astral travel and dreams were probably really powerful, and showed us exactly, what our position was in the collective unconscious. And do we trust where it's going, right? Do we truly have we truly surrendered to the full story here that is about to switch over here or turn over? And do we fully surrender to the idea that everything is already set and it's just a matter of divine timing? That's something to consider as well. And when you are over here, like I was, like, oh, I want to get this report out so much, right? I mean, I could, I can deconstruct all of this just with my chart itself, just to show you. But what is, though, and our full immersion into the experience of what is, and trusting and knowing, not even trusting, but knowing that the table is set, right? And it's all about the timing. It's not anything that we have to necessarily do, even though that's really where a lot of our action and initiative and our minds had been, and even our sustainment is through this idea. So I think that this really put us in a position really strongly to be like, well, I can act on these things and see the big picture and act on what I anticipate is coming and really find my voice through that. But the square, especially with the Sun and Neptune coming into the big square on the 11th, as we see here, let's see here. Right? That was, so we felt the stirring of it within us. And then by the time we get to Saturday, it's like fully engaged in terms of where we know we are going and anticipating and acting in anticipation of it. Whereas Neptune is just like, no, you just got to be in it, right? Be in it, be fully immersed in it and be it, rather than acting in anticipation of it. And I think this has been a really hard thing for people to wrap their heads around, to be honest. And whatever happened over the weekend was a pretty clear indication of the friction between trying to act in accordance with what we're expecting and having to be fully submerged in the experience of it. And it was really, really uncomfortable. What else happened this weekend? Let's look at that. I don't want to go into all of the transits because there's just too many. Just the big ones. So the 11th. Yeah, let's look at the 11th. And then there's going to be way more specific astrology for people based on their sign today. So you can look at that. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Venus came into that conjunction with Pluto on Saturday, right? And this is where, right here, 26 degrees of Capricorn. So this is where we start to really see, as a result of Pluto, right? Pluto just coming through and destroying and destroying and destroying, right? Mulching it all down, pulling it all up, whatever, it's doing, however it's acting this out. What we're then seeing in this process is the underlying esoteric or occult nature of the world we live in, right? That it's actually very much built on all the shit that's happening over in Scorpio land, right? It's all water. It's all the intensity of the feeling that is brought up in us when we come into communion with each other. And even if it's subconsciously, even if we are unconsciously participating, we're still participating in creating this. And this is the painful part of Pluto through Capricorn, and especially in this degree, is the last 5 degrees of Capricorn is like the real mastery of the physical realm, right? This is the separation between those who are the pawns and those who are playing the game itself, or all the pieces on the board. And so Pluto pulling everything away is just like, here, I'm going to just rip this back and show you all of the underlying energy that actually is what makes up our reality. Right? This is pulling back the veil, literally, and showing us that it's all feeling. It's all subconscious feeling, and that really finds its depth and intensity in the Scorpio realm, which is, Mars was finishing up its transit in Scorpio during this weekend. So when Venus meets Pluto in this exact position, what you find is when it's peeling back and showing it, we're also feeling it right in our everyday material reality. So in the touchdown of the tornadoes in the all of those states in the United States, and what that really showed us, right? Again, pulled back the veil in some ways. And I have some specific opinions about where that came from. And I'm sure that you can already tell the direction that I'm headed with that. And some of us have had conversations about this over the weekend about that seems pretty intense to come out of nowhere, considering the fact that it had been, barely 30 degrees here for the last week and a half, and then it shot up to 60 and had this incredible storm. It seems pretty drastic. But it also is bringing this reality right to our doorstep, like I said. And so, of course, Venus has to do with relationships. And I think in astrology, especially when you are tracking the Venus cycle, it's really easy to kind of get caught up in that aspect. And that's okay, because that's everything to being human. Is so much about our relationships and what the value of them to us. But Venus really is the value of the material world around us, and relationships have a lot to do with that. Now remember, Venus also rules Libra, so it's about being set in our 5 senses or more to the world around us, and attracting in. That's the thing about Venus. She attracts. She's a magnet. She doesn't act. She attracts. But in Capricorn, there's some wisdom here. There's a lot of wisdom. There's maturity. There's a sense that it's not just about her and what, or us and what makes us comfortable, but there's a sense here that we are responsible for what we contribute to creating for the whole. And there's something very potent about that came to, like I said, right to our doorstep on Saturday when these two came into a conjunction, right? Now I keep getting this Persephone vibe with the meeting of Venus and Pluto, but the fact that they're in Capricorn really also stands out to me, that this time she's not the princess, right? She's not, which in the Thoth Tarot, Venus represents the princess in all of the elements, right? Those court cards. But in Capricorn, she really is much more, like I said, more mature. She's got a lot of wisdom in her, and she's not taking any shit either. So when she meets Pluto, it's very interesting to me that they come together and represent the fact that she has the capacity to really hold the full experience of what Pluto is really showing us, right? She's just like, bring it on. And I do feel like that maybe that's also a part of what's been going on for people, is like, we're reestablishing our relationships with people, and we're starting to transform them. And that's a really generalized way to look at this connection. But when you start looking at it in terms of Capricorn and how it's about the energy that is flowing throughout the entire matrix of reality, the geometric fractal of reality is impacted by our own intensity of feeling. There is, she's like, bring it. I got this, right? Now she's going to station retrograde and go back over Pluto in this retrograde fashion, and she's going to really pull this in again, right? And then when she comes back direct over this point in February, after she makes a really strong conjunction with Mars in about 17 degrees Capricorn. And then she'll meet Pluto again later in February. At that point, it's like this first pass was just the beginning, right? The very beginning of just like, oh, okay. Yes, I see now. And so she's going to go back over in the retrograde and we'll be really internalizing the experience, so, but we'll be ready for it. And then by the end of February into March, when she passes over Pluto at the United States Pluto return, she is going to be like completely in charge of not only herself, but she's going to take full responsibility for what she is pulling towards her in order to contribute to, well, ultimately the destruction of what's here, right? And so it's very intense. Let's just put it that way. So that was Saturday. So if you had like things explode all around you on Saturday or something came up, this is really a big part of it, is Venus and Pluto coming together at this point. So, and 12/12 was no joke. And I talked about that too, that 12/12 was no joke. So then the moon came into Aries at the end of Saturday, right? And by the time it got to the 12th, this is where we find that the moon came into a conjunction with Chiron on yesterday, Sunday, right here. And then also too, the sun already came off of its square with Neptune, as we've talked about. And what else? There was something very in particular. Oh, and Mars was at its last degree of Scorpio. So another relief from tension. So who was it? Did Barb say that Sunday seemed like there was a feeling better? And I think that Mars really provided in some way, allowed for us to initiate in some way or act on some type of relief valve, whatever it was, right? That was at a social level, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So there's an outlet within some sort of limits, right? Because the energy is still immature. And I think, again, this is a big part of what came to our awareness in our physical reality with Venus, depending on where you find her in your current chart. Because in this conjunction with Pluto, who rules the Scorpio realm, I feel like that was a very intense experience. And so Mars at this very last degree, remember Mars is the co-ruler of Scorpio, so it's very, very powerful here still. And the initiative is towards the merging and the intensity of the feeling that comes from our cooperation or communion, right? When we come together intentionally to produce something. Or unintentionally, right? If we're being brought into it, without our awareness, it still matters, right? So any feeling experience of the collective, and relationships, interpersonal relationships, everybody has to deal with these elements that are centrifugal, right? That are going to just like fly out eventually. Like you can't stay in the depth of the underworld necessarily if you're still going to be alive and kicking, right? And so you have to bring it back out. And sometimes it's just like centrifugal force. It's just going to pop out. And so you can carefully manage this. So it can go a couple ways here. It can just go flying off. That's one negative aspect, especially with Mars involved, because there's just so much fire and action and initiative behind it. But it's the careful, you can really manage this power through the Sagittarian element, right? There can be an imaginative relief from the tension with the use of Sagittarius as the big picture, right? Of just like, oh yeah, this is the meaning of it. And this is the meaning that actually create something new. So it could just spin off out of control. And I think that that is definitely a possibility. I'm sure it was. But we can, the real gift at this degree of Scorpio, this last degree, is making our own ambitions and desires of value to everybody else. And Mars acting on it is even more powerful in terms of making our own subjective interests and desires valuable to the people that we are engaged with. And so whatever came out of Venus meeting Pluto in this moment, it's like Mars was able to kind of harness that energy in some way and use it as an outlet for something that we don't quite understand fully yet, but we know that it's powerful, and we know that we can actually use it to our advantage in some ways. So the Mars at the last degree yesterday, that means that Mars is now in Sagittarius, and we'll talk about that too. We'll talk more specifically about today's astrology in terms of the moon transits and stuff like we do during the dailies, and then we'll get into the general themes of the week. So the Sun square Neptune, the moon was in a conjunction to Chiron yesterday. So again, this is a really strong connection to all of the woundedness and the emotional wounds and the victim narrative or the savior narrative and everything else there that is imposition of some sort of emotional wound of ourself, pulling us off of keeping our central focus on all of the potential of what we can be, right? Instead of having it, the thing about Chiron in the chart is that it is some sort of identity wound that has been imposed upon us at a very early age. Sometimes it comes in with people through their previous incarnations, I've noticed. It's different for everyone in terms of what Chiron really represents, but there's a specific healing of identity right now that we're all going through. And so the moon passed over this point and made it even more, we made it even more potent in terms of how we feel about it in the moment, right? And so it passed, just like the moon passes, but it also really brought into a personal realization about what those Chiron wounds are all about. And again, for me, Chiron is in my second house right now, like in terms of, in whole sign astrology would be, the third house for Aquarius. But if we're going to look at house cusps, which I do because it makes things that much more exact, we are looking at, I do have Chiron and Neptune in my second house. So one's in Pisces, one's in Aries, and, my actual body itself and the physical reality that I engage with was very much brought into focus this weekend. And the inflammation, like I said, moon in Aries, inflammation is just, especially if you have it in your second house, my God, it's really intense. So what else happened? So the moon also was in a sextile to Saturn, which changed degrees today. So we'll talk about that as well, because this is a pretty big moment here. But the moon in a sextile to Saturn is, we've been challenged, really challenged, just grow up a little bit and see things for what they are instead of projecting our ideals onto them, which is really difficult to do when you have a lot of Sagittarius. And it's kind of how Sagittarius works, is just like, if I see the big picture, I see what we can actually create with the meaning at the root of all of this, and it's always focused on that area of what it can be and the value of our collective belief systems coming together, and alchemical transmutation is really important. But Saturn in Aquarius has really challenged us to just kind of grow up a little about it and be willing to see people and ourselves for who we actually are, instead of the projection of this idealized aspect onto everything around us, because that's not real. That's not the highest version of Aquarius. That's a holographic reality. It's false. And so Saturn, in in all of the as much as Saturn's a pain in the ass, right? It also gives us something we can't get around, and also a structure and a form and a backbone, to be perfectly honest, of just like, okay, this at least is going to keep me centered and strong. And so then I can do the difficult work of seeing people and myself for who we and I really am, or who people really are. And there's where your compassion really starts to develop, is by seeing things for what they are, as opposed to projecting your idealism onto it. And Aquarius is very much about the ideal. There's no two ways around that, but that's part of the journey through Aquarius, is being able to somehow simultaneously exist through the ideal and then be able to accept what is. So when you get to Pisces and you have to then be fully immersed in the experience, that you aren't like, oh, but my ideal, right? Because it's a different story once you're actually living it in full experience, full emotional experience. So Saturn, like I said, Saturn's always getting this like, this crazy fervor of like, it's evil. It just is what it is. And you take it or leave it. Now, the moon in a sextile to Saturn, speaking of which, is like, if we were able to move past this moment of Chiron here in Aries with the moon, and really feel into the ways that we are triggered into being pulled into an identity that's imposed on us, as opposed to, and that's definitely been happening. If we felt into that and were really honest and allowed ourselves to be adaptable in that moment, the sextile to Saturn, or more accurately, the sextile from Saturn to the moon, it's like, if we're able to see these old traditional images of ourselves in a new symbolic frame, wow, what a potential to reconcile this very uncomfortable position of like, oh, I'm looking at things for what they really are, flaws and all, instead of projecting my ideal onto them, or projecting my wounds onto them. Wow. That, I think, has been in effect for a number of weeks, ever since Saturn and Chiron came into their exact sextile. Real strong potential here to let go of these imposed identities and actually figure out who we really are for ourselves. This is a very potent moment yesterday. So you can even see the progression through the weekend, as Saturday was like the intensity of it. And then as Sunday moved forward, you could start to see it, have all of this potential to resolve. If we took that's the thing about a sextile, right? You have to still act on it in some way. There is something that you have to reconcile and balance out for yourself if you want to get the harmony of it. So when we come into today, which is where we're at now, so you see the moon, right? The moon is still in Aries, and we're going to talk about that because it's going to make, it's squaring Venus and Pluto over here in Capricorn. It will be in a trine to Mercury before Mercury comes into Capricorn, a trine to the sun, actually, and then we'll sextile Jupiter in Aquarius too. So Mars is now in the first degree of Sagittarius today. So, and the sun, by the way, is now in conjunction with the fixed star Ras Al Hague, which is the head of the snake charmer or the serpent bearer or Asclepius, right? And we talked about this already because Mercury crossed this point, and now this is where the sun is. And so again, the serpent and the serpent medicine and the Kundalini and what it represents and how we can utilize that for our own healing and express that part of ourselves, our passion, our drive, our desire to expand upon ourselves. If we can harness that and control it, I would say harness it rather than control it, and master it, honestly, we have the ability to take that energy and like make use of it out in the world. So, but we have to be able to handle the energy successfully and masterfully. Otherwise, we get bit, right? We get bit by the snake, and then we become, then we are infused with the poison or the venom, and that starts to poison our minds. It starts to poison our expression, and everything else extends from there, right? So this is another moment where we can really find our voice and our sustainment and our expression through being able to manage this intense energy. And so again, you could see how much of the weekend was like the serpent coming and biting, right? Or the serpent approaching us, and what we do with that energy as a result. And now we find ourselves on the other side of it. It's like, yes, I know that, identifying the big picture of things and the meaning of it and where we're going, we do see ourselves there. But with the square to Neptune, like I said, it's very difficult to keep our egos like focused there, like our expression, when we are just being like dissolved down into nothingness constantly because of Neptune. And I would add to that, dissolve down into propaganda, dissolve down into escapism, right? Well, we'll just believe whatever is like put across. And this is where the propaganda and the psyop type of energy intensifies ever since Neptune stationed direct. And these squares over to Neptune have been a challenge every step of the way of like, can you keep focused, eyes on the prize, when you are being inundated with more and more of this really strong infusion in some ways. So now that Mars is in Sagittarius, we're getting that like injection, right? There is an initiative to act on that meaning now. So let's see here. I want to also point out, let's look at the moon transits for today. And then we'll look at Mars in Sagittarius, because because this is going to be part of what I talk about going into each sign's astrology. And Mercury comes into Capricorn, and then we just talked about that too. So let's see here. We're going to look at the moon comes into a trine with the sun. This is happening, roughly right about now, actually. The moon comes into a trine with the sun. And so what is a trine? It's a 120-degree angle. It is an aspect that is very balanced and strong, provides a foundation, doesn't really require us to do much. And in fact, if it is a way that actually works against us, it is really hard to break, because you have these two aligned elements, right? Fire, especially the moon and the sun in Sagittarius, and the moon in Aries in this trine. So there's a lot of cosmic optimism now, right? With the moon in late Aries, and considering all of our prospects as individuals and how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about about abundance, and the idea that cooperation and human togetherness will allow for abundance, right? These are all aspects that are developing within our own intuition, right? And in our own feelings with the moon in Aries. And so we can become very, there is a quickening to every possibility of individual discovery and experience. The downside to this position of the moon in Aries is that we waste time contemplating things instead of acting on them. But considering that we're talking about the moon, there's not a lot of action involved other than, really aligning with our own feelings about this. So there is a sense that we can adapt to the environment, adapt to, our own feelings around us, our own feelings, the world around us, and really tap into our intuitive nature when it comes to all of our prospects. And in a trine to the sun that is in conjunction with Ras Al Hague, actually, in this position of making use of our own special background in order to, make the most of our situation. We may be self-contained. We've maintained our own integrity, and that's really important. And we make use of our own integrity and our own seclusion in some ways. Well, especially if we find ourselves in situations where we feel separated from everybody else around us, there's something that we can utilize. And again, goes back to the serpent medicine and the snake bearer, our ability to manage this energy, to maintain our own integrity in this situation and not be taken over. And then we can actually use that energy to get something, right? And it can be a valuable foundation to not only operate successfully in the world, but even be accepted without losing our own character. So this trine to the moon is, we are feeling very sensitive to all of our prospects in this trine, and it really anchors and provides a strong foundation for our expression through maintaining our own integrity in a situation that may feel very foreign to us, right? And that will actually allow us to get something valuable from the world around us just by using that. So this trine today is kind of like, remember who you are, and remember that if we all work together, even if you don't feel like you belong in the world around you, it is still the imperative of each of us to find the way to work together, and that starts within us. We have to actually be able to identify that potential within us, and when we do that, this is a beautiful moment. It's a beautiful moment to recognize that we all have something to offer, and it doesn't mean giving ourselves away, which is a big part of the moon and Neptune in Pisces. I think we really and the giving away of ourselves, I think really did come to us in our awareness in terms of some sort of invasion, right? And we realize like how important our boundaries actually are, and to know ourselves in the midst of all of the wave like breaking over us, right? And so this is a moment here, a very beautiful moment, this trine. And if we take the opportunity to really capitalize on all of our own potential in that moment, then we can actually, there's something there that can be offered for the world around us, even if we don't feel like we belong there. So let's see here. Then the moon comes into square. It's just a moment though, because when we get by this afternoon into the early evening, and we see that the moon then squares the Pluto and Venus kind of complex here, this is where if we have accumulated too much, if we have more than we can hold within ourselves, right? If our inflammation is too much, whatever it is, if we are obsessed by our own potential, this is where we are going to, get smacked right in the face, right? With Pluto and Venus at this point. So our mind is confronted with things that haven't been experienced yet in terms of our own potency. And we may find it difficult to adjust to that in the moment, right? And so we may rush ahead excitedly and lose our bearings in the moment, right? And this is, again, Moon in Aries. So we're talking about our own feelings about ourselves and our intuition and how we maybe will emotionally act or react to them. So it's important that we reach a state of calm watchfulness here and really heed the warning against biting off more than we can chew, because in a square to this Venus-Pluto complex in Capricorn, we will, I think that we could find ourselves losing our bearings, right? And I mean, that certainly has kind of made itself start to be known over the weekend. And now it's each of us are going to come into some sort of friction with like really getting kind of full of ourselves. And when we haven't even like had any experience with this new state of feeling yet, and we're still confronted with it, which is Venus and Pluto and Capricorn confronted with it. it will be uncomfortable. And I'm not suggesting that we should back off of anything either. It's just we're definitely going to feel how important this calm state of watchfulness and observer mode is going to be really important. And we can have an uncompromising independence about our own self and our own feelings and our own intuitive channel and our boundaries as spiritual beings. Of course, we can have independence. But I can also see how that is going to bump right up against Pluto and Venus in Capricorn. That is so powerful right now, as opposed to the, moon in Aries. We could really find ourselves kind of burning ourselves out if we are not careful. Now, I think that the conjunction being exact with Pluto and Venus on Saturday already set the tone for how intense this is. And so now this is kind of like feeling into what it's like to bump up against new experiences that we haven't fully formulated within ourselves yet, and how much tension that is going to potentially create when up against these massive cycles that are, especially with Pluto involved. Pluto has been in this degree now for weeks and weeks and weeks, so the only thing that's made it that much more intense is the Venus, right? Like I said, bringing it literally to our doorstep in our bodies and in what and whom we value in our lives. And that is relationships. That is our resources, our energetic resources. That is, what has value to us is feeling the destruction now. And if we blaze ahead in a flash, in square to this, we are just going to, hit a wall or totally burn ourselves out. So that's something to be aware of. And then the moon comes into a sextile by the end of the day with Jupiter in Aquarius. That's now in conjunction with the natal moon of the United States, 27 to 28 degrees Aquarius. And we have to really start preparing ourselves to accept the objective results about who we are. And this is, again, a sense of responsibility for what our individual actions will produce in people. And when we talk about the moon, we have to be really clear here that we're talking about our own feelings and how, again, they produce something. And we need to be responsible for that, because it has just as much of an impact on the collective unfolding as everybody else now, right? And if you're not pulling your weight, then you know that other people are having to pick up the slack. And I think a lot of people are picking up slack, not as much as there used to be, but it seems like there was a big, the Agent Smiths, there was a reason they were working overtime, right? There was a reason. And I think that they knew what was coming, and they knew whoever they are, right? Agent Smith. I mean, it was just a program in the Matrix that was able to, get out ahead of things and be like, let's make changes in the programming so that people aren't like fully aware. So, and then emotionally are getting fragmented or burning themselves out or having to focus on other things. So this sextile to Jupiter in this moment here, Jupiter, who represents all of the fame for sure, good fortune, expansiveness, right, is advocating for us as long as we are working in accordance with the value system that gives us meaning. Jupiter is like, hey, it's about chopping wood and carrying water. If you can find your daily activities of meeting your basic needs as a sacred act, you're going to get what you need. And more than that, you will get you'll get resources to act in accordance with the larger social value system as well, not just for your own assets, but for something much larger than yourself. That's the thing about the big picture and the ninth house in Sagittarius, which is what Jupiter rules. Now it is in Aquarius, so it's bringing it all to this very singular laser point focus of the social organism as a whole and what the power is. And so if we're acting in accordance with that, we're going to, the idea is that we receive what we need in order to in order to execute these actions, right? And it goes, and it's a feedback loop in some ways. If we are seeing every act of self-sustainment in our physical basic needs as a sacred act, then Jupiter, the idea is that it responds by expanding on that. And when that happens, then we have more resources to keep acting in accordance to those basic needs. And then we start to really value and adhere to service to others, because that's ultimately the highest version of Aquarius, is that the collective is a bunch of nodal points of individual sovereign beings that are acting in accordance to the needs of the whole by being themselves, right? So Jupiter, in terms of the big picture, like, hey, the big picture here is everybody's taking care of themselves. It's going to feed back into the system in a positive way. So here are the resources in this closed loop, well, this feedback loop. Now the moon in the last degrees of Aries in this is really powerful too, because as we get closer to Taurus, we have to start taking responsibility for the objective results, right? In Aries, it's all potential all the time. Like there's never nothing is solidified until it starts coming into Taurus, right? It's just like the seed isn't viable till you plant it in the soil. And this is where this starts to happen. And then there's no going back from that. It becomes entrenched or embedded in the material world, and we become inseparable from that experience. And so the moon in 28 degrees Aries is that we have to start taking responsibility for actions we'll produce in the collective. And there can be some disillusionment when we learn that we can't actually depend on other people exclusively for applauding our efforts, right? Sometimes we just have to, really feel into the objective results of what we are doing and not rely on the feedback we're getting from everybody else about it. This is really hard for people just in general. But imagine if you are a person who has given everything to this, to a certain mission, and having to accept the fact that everything that you think you valued is being taken away. Venus conjunct Pluto. Complete spiritual independence. That's really what the moon in Aries at this point represents. So if we can feel within ourselves complete spiritual independence, right? We don't rely on other people to tell us, hey, you're doing the best thing, right? Because chances are, if you're actually like working towards truth and really committed to it, you're going to be destroyed from every angle, or attempts to destroy you from every angle. So this sextile with Jupiter, again, is if we can prepare ourselves for maturity and possible self-criticism, and consider the objective results without getting too caught up in the feeling of it, which is really hard with the moon in Aries, and accept there may be disillusionment to a certain extent. When we do, this sextile with Jupiter is going to be such an important investment that we can make, because it's going to be in our service to the whole, not into our own feelings of ourselves and our own ego and subjective experience. And there's nothing wrong with our ego. It is Aries. It is the seed point. It is the beginning of everything that grows from there, and it allows us to have all of the capacity to survive. It's when we start to realize that must be embedded in a material world that has consequences. It's in that realization we can invest that into real service to the whole by just taking care of ourselves, right? Making every single act to meet our basic needs an act of reverence and sacredness. And I think that those things are going to, we have the opportunity to really reconcile a very disappointing moment potentially by the end of today. So that's the astrology for today. And of course, Mars coming into Sagittarius is the perpetuation of the spirit of struggle, right? Again, we're going to have a lot of initiative and action behind us in order to start trying to produce something better, and really accessing the linked roots of a common past, with the people that we are under the same umbrella, right? Under the same firmament. And we can accomplish quite a bit through the cultivation of enduring ties with others, or we could really just burn ourselves out by being so hyper focused on where we've been and wanting it to come back. And you're going to see that. You're going to see a lot of people, I think, really continuing to spend their vital energy of action and initiative trying to bring something back that's never coming back, right? And so we have to be very clear with ourselves about where our initiative is really going in terms of Mars and Sagittarius, because it's going to be here for, a number of weeks. So we'll have plenty of time to go over that. So when we go through the week here, just to give you an idea of what to expect leading up to the full moon, and then I'll start recording all of the different signs, all 12 signs, and how this week is going to affect you directly. We're going to see that the moon finally comes into Taurus tomorrow, which means it's going to square Saturn. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. It's going to square Saturn. The moon will meet Uranus, square Saturn at the same time. We are going to have a Saturn square Uranus on the 24th. That is Christmas Eve. For anybody who celebrates that holiday, that's going to... I mean, a Saturn square Uranus is those two don't get along normally. And so for them to be squaring off like that is going to be very, very powerful. And I'll talk about Saturn in just 1 second, because it's really important to be aware of the degree that Saturn has now moved into, which is 10 to 11 degrees, because now it is much more about our ability to find inspiration from within rather than looking to the external world for answers or a sense of security. That's going to be really hard, really, really hard for many people, okay? Especially if you have been invested, if you or anybody you know that's been invested. And part of the sextile with the moon in Aries to Jupiter in that moment is going to be the preparation point for coming into the square, with the moon squaring Saturn tomorrow, meeting Uranus. That is going to be very... disruptive in our emotional state and a sense of emotional security. Big time, right? And so, but plenty of opportunities for awakening as well. So the other thing I want to talk about too is that means that Mars is eventually going to meet K2, or the South Node, and the stirring of the energies of the waves is going to come back around and be even more powerful now. And we're going to act on it in some way, or we're certainly going to feel like we want to act on the stirring of these unconscious energies that is coming up from our past. And we will want to act on it, and we'll feel it. And again, just like I said, if you are a person, or you know anyone, or people in general are trying to utilize this initiative to reminisce about the past and be hyper focused on it, this is going to be a very difficult time for these people, okay? And we're all going to go through difficulty about what is never coming back, okay, in terms of our perceived Capricornian matrix. But also too, that means it's in opposition to the North Node, right? And so that's going to be very difficult to stay focused on the path ahead when you have Mars that is like this warrior energy acting on where we've been. And if you can't see that that's where we're coming away from, then it's going to be I think you're going to be running in circles, basically. So this is the 14th into the 15th. What is happening on the 15th here? Like I said, the moon will have crossed over Uranus in a square to Saturn. The 16th, we see here that the moon now moves into Gemini on this day. So that means it'll cross over the Pleiades. The moon will cross over the Pleiades. It will meet the position of the full moon lunar eclipse that we had in the last cycle, just as like a reminder, and then we'll move into Gemini. Let's see what else is happening here. And that means that the moon will also be in opposition to Mars. Again, that's when it's going to be even more powerful in terms of what we're really going to be people are really going to want to act in accordance with the conflict in itself, right? And the moon, at least in this opposition, will give us, I mean, it's not going to be easy, but there will be a strong intuitive draw down into where we're going, right? And maybe our intuitive channel will need to really be tapped into so we can see where we're going and see how the conflict is really just momentum. And if we can act on it in that way and not get caught up in reminiscing on what has been, I think it'll be okay. But this is going to be a very difficult time for people. Very difficult. And then, let's see. It's mostly just moon transits up until we get to the full moon. So the moon will meet Aldebaran, of course. You can see that right here at 9 to 10 degrees of Gemini. And also, too, it's going to, you know, with the moon in Gemini, that means we're going to have squares to Neptune. That means we are going to have the full moon on the 18th, as we see here. And the sun will be at the galactic center at this point, and so close to coming into the solstice point. And so here's our full moon, 27 to 28 degrees Sagittarius and Gemini. Man, it's going to be really, really powerful. And at this point, Venus, you can see here, is already stationed retrograde at this point. That is, let's see, that's happens, yeah, it's pretty much the day of the full moon. And if you check out how far, I mean, it's pretty much just maybe an hour or two before the full moon is exact. Venus stations and starts moving retrograde. And this degree of, this is the Pluto, or right before the Pluto return of the US. So 26 to 27 degrees Capricorn is the path up the mountain, right? And now it's like we touch the pathway, and now we're going to go back down because we're like, this isn't the right path. And part of that, I think, became brought to our awareness when Venus met Pluto. And so she's going to come back and meet it again later in the month. So not far from here. I mean, honestly, we're going to see it probably happen on, so the solstice is right here on the 21st. So maybe Christmas, perhaps Christmas Day even. It's going to meet again. Look at that. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say Christmas Day, Venus is going to meet. Yep, Venus is going to meet Pluto again on Christmas Day. We're going to, and the moon will be in Virgo. Great. Boy, at least the moon will be in Virgo, and we'll be very meticulous about our emotions. And hopefully that means our astral and energetic hygiene is a big focus for us at this time. And I would say that it's going to be really important because of the fact that right before that, Saturn and Uranus will square each other. So Saturn at 10 to 11 degrees, where we're at right now, 10 to 11 degrees of Aquarius, like I said, is we really need to now start to be mature enough to find our own answers from within. Okay, so that's a big part of where Saturn is right now. And I know that that's hard because we're like, don't want to grow up, but we kind of have to, and we have to start taking responsibility for looking for our own answers within and fine-tuning that discernment rather than expecting anything to come from outside of us. So let's see here. I'm going to tap back in here. I feel like Venus, yeah. I definitely too. I've been really, really connecting with Venus quite a bit lately, like a lot. And then maybe Venus and Pluto conjunct right on my midheaven near my natal Venus had to do with the high heart opening despite all the confusion, death and rebirth, especially, yeah, when it comes to belief systems and how that informs your actual contribution as well. So that could certainly, yeah. So you guys, I'm just going to leave it here for today. That is plenty to work with. So just, you know, if you're not subscribed to the channel, either on YouTube or BitChute, you can do that. And then you'll know when I drop the videos in terms of the signs, and you can check that out. And of course, thank you so much for being here. I truly, truly appreciate each and every one of you. If you are interested in a reading or energetic support through Reiki for your process, you can, just kind of check out here at the end here. I'll add some stuff to the chat while you can look at the ways that you can support this channel, either through Subscribestar, or you can go to my website, catalystenergies.net, for more information or to book a session. And there will be a lot of information coming out here pretty soon in terms of the solstice and in terms of just a lot of things. I got a lot of things on the back burner that are I'm working on. And, of course, with Capricorn now becoming so much more of a focus as we're coming into the solstice. Mercury is now in Capricorn, right? The sun will soon be in Capricorn. There's going to be a lot of attention and energy, at least in terms of our minds and in terms of what we are here to do in terms of our contribution. What is our destiny? So that's going to be a lot more of a focus, I would say, in the near future here. So guys, thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. And so I'm going to stick around on the chat here for a few minutes if you are interested in doing that. And I love you guys. Please take very good care of yourselves. These are not easy times, and I am here to support you. We're here to support each other, of course. And we'll be together tomorrow for the Daily Medicine transmission. Take care of yourselves and each other. I love you. God bless you. I will see you tomorrow. Take care.